Hello. Here we are going live. Seems to be working. So let's set us up with our chat window and such. Don't mind me derping around, setting things up as we do. As you might have seen from the promo picture, I have a new thing. Hey, Andy. Zachary. I'm going to see whether I can't try a new thing today. And we'll see how that works. Don't mind me while I fuss with everything. It's all the more tricky now that I have a microphone set up with a acoustic nest that it goes into, because that obscures the camera, but it also obscures the screen. We will soon make it so that doesn't matter, though. So yeah, I've had an idea as to something that I might be able to do apart from the usual making notes and explaining things, and that is most certainly something that I can do. The way things are going at the moment, I can do ASMR because I'm using the acoustic nest for this room, for this microphone. Here, I'll show you. It's kind of like this. Got the mic, and this is a thing, a Neewer NW5 vocal booth, which this is not really a vocal booth, but I'll explain how this works and why I've selected it. This is not really a vocal booth at all. That's not how that works. It's not really sound control in the normal sense, and absorption isn't really soundproofing in the normal sense either. There is one purpose for this funny little device, and that purpose is this. If I'm talking into the microphone that's right here, what happens is my voice is somewhat directional. It's not a completely omnidirectional radiator, so it's pointing forwards out of where I'm talking from. And having this device here bobbling around, I have an additional wing of it that would obscure the camera. Having this here means I am speaking into this little sort of hemispherical acoustic foam lined thing. And what that does is the early reflections around my voice, such as the computer screen that's right here, can, in some cases, be hitting the acoustic foam here. I think I can show you that. This is what one of the panels looks like. I'm not sure how solid this is. I think it's possible that this is just perforated. And actually, I can find out by science. I can find out by making a sort of spike out of paper. And we're going to quickly find out whether this is a panel or whether this is just hollow. And that is not just straight up acoustic foam. So this is a perforated aluminum panel with something probably not very like cardboard or something on the inside. Seems legit. Seems like a fine thing. So if I'm talking into this, it doesn't actually kill all the sound, because the sound can go in any sort of direction, but particularly high frequencies bouncing off of where I'm pointing them aren't going to be a thing, because I'm talking into the acoustic foam. And that's what this thing is. That's what a like full cheap vocal booth thing like this is about. And it matters more if you've got the rest of your system on point. The way this works is if I talk into the microphone like this, the back reflection off of the screen here, off of the speaker over there, off of all this other stuff, is not as easily reflected, because it's going to be absorbed by the soundproofing foam there, the sound absorbing foam there. And another note is that this pyramid pattern, this is not big enough to be extremely good low frequency absorption. This is strictly high frequency absorption. And basically all that's happening is you talk in this direction into the microphone, and then the earliest reflections get somewhat captured by this sound absorption here. And that means that the room doesn't reverberate quite as much as it otherwise would. Without that there, it would be considerably more roomy. So that's the idea. That's something that I've set up fairly recently. Unlike the actual microphone itself, the newer vocal booth, which again, this is kind of dishonest in a sense, because it's not in any sense a real vocal booth, but it is a small amount of advantage, akin to if you had an SM58 and you put a foam windscreen over that. It wouldn't really change it all that much, but it would change it a little bit in a desirable way. And that's the point of that. So what I was thinking, here, let me have a look at how people are talking. Oh, and this also gives me the capacity to do AMSR stuff, seeing as I have the microphone and I'm compressing a little more than before. Like if I wasn't compressing, like now, it's considerably less roomy. The compressor really brings that stuff up a lot. I'm also not quite sure what you mean, because if I lean forwards, then it will be... let's put the compressor back on. If I lean forwards, maybe you're thinking bassy or something, because if I lean backwards, then the room is going to be more active. Whereas if I'm zoomed right in, I'm compressing it hard, and it shouldn't be nearly as roomy if I'm up close. But yeah, so I don't know. If you think it sounds better when I lean back, then I can just lean back. No biggie. The idea is to be able to do a very high performance voiceover type thing, which is really exaggerated and extreme. And it's a matter of taste. It's a matter of what you're trying to make happen. So yeah, not to get super distracted by that, guess what? I have a new toy. Check that out. Hi, this is my work environment. I have my laptop plugged in to the actual stream. And underneath the chat, it's a whole bunch of test sounds and various things like VST Master Zip is what I make VST plugins out of, starting from the other kind. WinVST project is the same as VST project over here. These things, like, I am having a problem though. Let me take a plank of wood and sit it down here. I need something that has a texture so that I can control this mouse. These are ways of triggering parallels, which is how I'm emulating stuff. This sucker is not connected to the internet in any way, because especially when I'm running the Windows builds, I don't want Windows connecting to the internet for any reason whatsoever, because it's just going to get itself infected or something. And I don't want my Linux instance connecting to the internet either. That is the background pictures that I put on my music sometimes. I have a pattern generator called Starfish X that's generated those sometimes. And as you can see here, let me put chat back. We'll hide this for the moment. Some of that stuff underneath there is just things like, I can show you, a golden ratio is nothing but a bit of code that is giving you a very high quality golden ratio calculation. It's a snip of code out of where that works. And I also don't have audio coming out of this laptop, but that's fine, because the thing is, this microphone's so good I can use its little internal speakers, and sometimes I do my audio coding when I don't have to be really critical without good monitoring. It's like you can just use the laptop speakers for some of these things. And the thing I'm thinking about doing today is walking you through Nikola. Nikola being the, I'm going to have to be careful that you can still see what's on the screen. Here, let me fuss with things a little bit. There, if I keep the screen where I can see the stuff over here, then you'll be able to see what shows up. And as near as I can tell, there's no reason I can't code a plugin on the live stream. So that might be amusing. And I can see your live chat right there. So if people were interested in doing this sort of thing, or even just keeping me company while I do this sort of thing, this is something that we can do. Although you can also ask questions, since this is the Q&A. Also, I note that Bo said my room has such good acoustics. There's a reason for that. I have been getting these things. I wonder if I can actually show you. Let me go and get this camera and fool with it. So here's the deal. I've been putting in these things, and if you think that it sounds really good, it might be because I've been adding stuff like diffusion. What you see there is some Auralex T-fusers, which is basically diffusion. It's not cheap stuff, but it seems fairly well done. And I painted it the color of the walls. And there's some more over there. And I've also got some more over here. This is actually a little bright, so let me stop this down. That's what an Auralex diffuser looks like when you buy it. And it costs about $250 for 4 of them. I've bought that twice, so that's one of them. There's another 2 there, sort of opposite from where I'm at. You can see this is my main light. The mirrors are not acoustically helpful, but they do reflect sound very brightly, so it's giving a little more zing to the room. And the mirrors are, as you can see, so that this light continues to appear in multiple places on the camera. And then here is a wall full of diffusers, which I have put on the wall and painted. And specifically what I've done is it comes with these sticky 3M double-sided tape strips, and I've taken that and attached it and then driven drywall screws through because I don't trust the tape to not just fall off. And it takes a couple of coats of paint to paint one of these. It doesn't stick very well. And then here is where the camera sits, and I will go and put that back now. So yeah, Chris style video studio. If you're interested in going that direction, those are some of the things that I've done to that effect. And as far as what kind of paint you can use on one of these, they're basically plastic. There's some concern about those because the thing is, it's kind of like putting bamboo wall hangings or whatever, which I've also got some of that in some of my places. In that these are not commercial grade. You can buy them, but they're for residential use only because they are not sufficiently fire resistant to use in commercial facilities. That isn't to say that they're like styrofoam and they're going to explode in flames. They're not styrofoam. But, oh, and Andy, you mentioned the drum room. I had one of those left over, if you counted, and it went directly over my head, literally in the drum room. I have been spending days working on that drum room and rearranging. I've still got the drums on the riser, but I took down all the rototoms and replaced it with just a rack tom and a floor tom, sort of the John Bonham set kind of thing, or what Foo Fighters guys like to call the John Bonham version, because they have a cajillion drums, but then they also tend to have a very simple kit, which has very few parts to it. And I did that because I set up the rack tom to also have aluminum foil lining it so that it could do the sort of Led Zeppelin controlled decay thing, which that does. And I don't have a camera that will stretch far enough to go to the drum room, so I can't show you that right now. But I've been spending some time getting that together. I had to do a major tear down and rebuild of some of that stuff. And in doing it, I also cut down on the cymbals and things. So I've got a set of Saluda hats, a probably Zildjian ride cymbal all the way over on the right, and then a large washy ride-like crash, kind of like what you'd see in Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii. There's a part where Nick Mason is playing on a set of cymbals that are huge, laid out to his right, and they're sort of large crash ride-like things. So I've got two cymbals like that. One of them is literally a ride, and one of them has crash-like qualities. And then over on the other side of the rack tom, near the snare, is a smaller Zildjian K crash, which is one of the hybrid crashes where the outside is ridged and the inside is bright. Inside is sort of bare polished metal without the lathed grooves that you get in cymbals. And the other thing that I did, since I had cut down the amount of space taken up by all this stuff with not having as many rack tubes and drum parts everywhere. I have all of the cymbals now sitting flat rather than having them clamped down so that you can have the cymbal up at an angle and hit it more easily. I decided to place them where all the cymbals, the crash, the ride, the larger crash, all rest, sort of gravity rests completely flat, meaning it's easier to hit the edge of them if I want to do an edge crash on any of them, but I have to lift my arm up a little bit to hit them across the top. And I found, and I also took off some damping. I had some cut out sections of a Remo Black Dot, Remo CS head. I had stripped off the dots off of some of these heads for the rototoms and kept them because you can then stick that piece of plastic on stuff. And I removed the pieces of Black Dot head that I had stuck on several of my cymbals to try to make them ringless, and instead had the cymbals hanging completely flat without being tilted at all, meaning that you have the felt that they sit on, and normally you put another felt on top and then you crank down a little wing nut and then you can position it however you want. But if you loosen the felt completely, it will tend to go flatter. And then if you point it completely straight up and down with only a piece of felt and loosened completely, it's not only flat, but it is also clamped as little as possible, meaning that it will rock, but it'll also resonate as openly as possible. So now I have sort of long decay cymbals, and that's a change. That's the opposite of what I had before. So the next time I get into, and again, this is the hope. The hope is that at some point I can get through all of these tasks. As you've seen, I put up diffusion, I'm working on various things. I'm continuing to do plugins. We're going to do Nikola, or at least look at Nikola. And the hope is to get to a point where I can record new music again and maybe have something to do when demoing plugins other than the one track of kind of heavy rock sounding stuff that I did God knows how many months ago. I don't know. It remains to be seen. I get distracted easily. Some of the time, I'm following the news. I was talking about how it's like, oh yeah, anybody who's looking at this from the future, bear in mind that right now we live in interesting times. And oh boy, do we ever. I don't think there's much I need to say about it other than, yep, these are interesting times. So anybody who is distracted or less functional now than they'd like to be, I feel that's pretty understandable. But yeah, I'm glad you like that track. I feel that I could do better, but that's kind of the whole point, isn't there? Like, one of the reasons I got the microphone going was so that I could do vocals if I came up with something that had words and could benefit from vocals. And generally that is helpful at making any rock or pop track. I'm now looking at what David just said. All of the chat on live chat, but I see it in your side window. Well, I've got the window set to live chat, and I don't know, man. I can't control what YouTube does, so we're kind of at the mercy there. We'll see what happened. Andy is asking for a theory wheel post. Funnily enough, I now have 3 of them, which I can now show you. Here's what happened. And this has also taken a few hours to do. I started with this one. These all have essentially the same general concept. Like, we start with all white keys on the keyboard, and it's this one spot. In every one of them, it's a circle of fifths that goes around each way. And it's a matter of how do you organize the vertical direction here. Because the horizontal or the radial direction is always going to be straight up circle of fifths. And it's also going to always be the same inversion of a chord, like if this is a G7. Which is kind of funny because actually kind of think of it, no, that's right. If this is a G7, then all of the ones going around are also going to be seventh chords. And I started with this. And then I went to this. This being the most recent, let me hold it up. I do need to scan it, I know. I was too busy spending some more hours making the next one to scan the first one. And as you can see, this is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They are all in order. So this is a sort of diatonic concept where you got your circle of fifths and you've got your funny inversions. One side effect of this is that the mode that you get if you start with B minor is Locrian, the weirdest mode of all. So what I've got here is a set of chords that follow a nice little diatonic pattern. It's like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And if you fixate on one of these and call it the root, these are normal, Aeolian and Ionian, it's major and minor. Locrian is super non-normal, so that seems a bit weird. And then Dorian is pretty normal and it gets increasingly weird, and then Mixolydian is sort of on the bottom here. And Mixolydian is giving you sort of seventh chords, and that's also relatively normal. So this is a weird way of doing it, even though it is purely diatonic. It's notes in order. And what happened was I started speculating on something that I'd seen. I'm pretty sure it was a TED Talk, which those are usually pretty useless, but who knows, maybe they will have uses after all because they gave me an idea. And that was, on this TED Talk, it was a guy talking about the common factors of music. And he was sort of jumping to the side and getting people to sing notes. I don't remember exactly which TED Talk this is, but it's, the common factors of music. I can do this. And he jumps to the side and people are sort of singing in diatonic phrases. And then he jumps far to the side and people automatically go to pentatonic. They automatically go to this other way of thinking stuff out. And he was like, yeah, all people, no matter what language they speak, do that. So I thought, what if I made another chord chart, but instead of being diatonic, although it still includes the diatonic notes, it tries to do a pentatonic scale, which, if you are a musician, you can play a pentatonic scale over major and minor just by sliding it around a little bit. You wind up with similar notes. Yeah, it's the Don't Worry Be Happy guy. Bobby McFerrin? Yeah, that's the one. And what I hit upon was you start with the minor, and then I started tracking what was in the pentatonic scale and then tacking the other ones on at the end. And what I got was minor is first here, then you get major, then you get Dorian, then you get Phrygian, then you get Mixolydian, then you start getting the weird ones like Locrian and Lydian. So what that produced calculating it out, and there's another interesting effect. Like, we'll notice with this previous one that we've got like our A to D, B minor to E minor, D minor to G, so we've got two different D minors in close proximity here. Interestingly, when we do it this other way, calculating it out by pentatonics, the immediate proximity poses, and I was also trying to calculate out what things like the 4-chord song chord inversions would do, and I found that that shape on this becomes like F, C, G, A minor, F, C, G. It's going along the circle of fifths with an offshoot, and that goes to what would be Dorian mode, but we're calculating it out as just A minor, which is the same as this here. Yeah. I'm swapping these out. I'm trying to calculate what was going to work better. This is the one where it's organized in very much a diatonic mode. You can see the stuff in the black stripe says A minor, B minor, C, D minor 13, because it's a Dorian mode. E minor 7th flat, E minor 7 flat 9th, which is a Phrygian. And then F something, F add 11, which is Lydian. And then G7, which is Mixolydian. So these are in order of note. And anywhere you go along this wheel, if you're doing like D flat, E, F sharp, A flat, A, B7, here, it's still in order, it's just in a different mode. Whereas this one is the one that I've done more recently, where I was trying to calculate it out using the pentatonic scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you cover these up, you got a straight up pentatonic scale, and when you choose to do that, you're leaving out the ugliest modes, the most unmusical modes. Those just happen to be the modes that are centered on notes that aren't in the pentatonic scale. And you also just happen to have the stuff closest to the edge here. If you were starting at this and applying a control voltage to get up into other ranges, applying a small voltage will keep you centered around majors and minors. I feel that'll be more easy to interpret, whereas the other one, it would start throwing these chords at you that could be interpreted as in the Locrian mode, which is very difficult to hear. And I have programmed this up, and I have updated all of my chord organ data files to reflect this, and I have not yet found time to turn it on and hear what it does. So I'm going to need to patch that together in order to do more of my house music type stuff. Got a lot of stuff going on with that, because I've also got the Turing machine like trigger generators there all patched together so that the kick drum isn't necessarily just a continuous beat so much as it'll run on an 8th note clock instead of a 16th note clock. And I can hold the right knob down and fill it up with beats if I want to, but I can also let it start randomly evolving beats, and that might become interesting. It will also produce other triggers that can launch things like chords or whatever, but that's something that will slowly evolve as the music plays. And I've got another one dedicated to snare notes. And I can set it to very rarely changing if I want to occasionally have something happen in the composition. But I've got those foregoing triggering stuff. Again, I have not heard this yet because I've been too busy soldering it all together. And the kick drum happens just an instant faster than the other beats, and the snare drum happens just an instant later than the other beats. so that hopefully as it starts generating these random, because it is essentially random, it just loops, these random sequences, it can also groove to an extent. Like the kick drums will slide in under the hi-hats and stuff, and the snare drums will swing a little bit. There'll be a little bit of a backbeat feel on those. And it all depends on how that stuff works out. But there's a lot of effort going into making all of that stuff happen. And hopefully it will. I'll see. One of the things I did decide to do was to take the bright, shiny hi-hat module that I've got and the shaker module that I've got and take them out of the stereo mixer that's built into that. There's a little submixer in here called Unity from the company 2HP. It seems to be a pretty good piece. It's a pretty well-designed thing. And what you can do is take it and plug 3 different stereo pairs in and take 1 stereo pair out, so it saves me inputs. And right now I've got that set up so that it's doing the clap effect, and the clap effect has stereo to it. And I've got the clap effect. I've got a stereo delay that I haven't always used because it doesn't fall into, it's not always something I think of to use. And then I've got the outputs of some of my wave generators running through VCAs, so I'll be able to do sort of stereo, weird, sine wave, freaky, forbidden planet noises. And yeah, as you can see, I work on this stuff rather than turning it on and listening to it. And that's because if I set it up wrongly, I won't want to turn it on and listen to it. That is a concern sometimes with building your system, building your studio, setting your stuff up with tools, is if you pick tools that are uninspiring, then it can just grind you to a halt as far as creating stuff. So it's the thing. It's the thing about like, well, what kind of noises do I intend to make in this music business? And yeah, part of that is the hooking that stuff up differently. Part of that stuff is this new chart, which is the which you can't really see very well. I'm sorry about that. I really do need to scan this. Now I've got several different ones to scan. But the chart where I can pick a particular thing, like the Ionian mode or whatever, pick like D major, and that's going to be Ionian, and then set a random thing going on. And it can sort of bounce around between like B minor and D and E minor and A and G and whatever, and start throwing these an interesting side effect of this is that if I bounce around enough, I could have something that goes A, D, or A, D, G, A minor, A, D. So it will switch between A minor and A major in fairly close proximity, which is not the case with the previous one. In fact, I'm not sure it's possible with the previous one. Maybe it is. But yeah, we can pick out stuff. Similar thing here. If I was in the key of C, I can wander in the vicinity of these using a random control voltage and be getting G minor and G in fairly close proximity, which I'm speculating now. No, that's kind of similar to what the previous one did. But in this one, it can be doing that with relatively small control voltage offsets when centered around a very approachable, like major key or something like that. I am now looking around to see what would happen if I was in the minor key and did the same thing. Yeah, the way that the circle of fifths works is only one of these notes will change each step you go across. So this is to some extent exploration, because as you know, if you've been following what I do, I've been doing this particular exploration around algorithmically generated chords for some time now. And I'm almost stuck, not able to start with this again, because I thought of another thing, which is now I've got all those chord organs which generate the notes set up so that I have an external thing powering them with control voltages, and the external thing is able to provide an offset all by itself, so I don't have to dial in the knobs on each of the chord organs, the chord offset and the note offset, and make them match. Instead, they're all down at 0, and I can't touch them because touching them would make them no longer be following the same set of chords. So if they all sit at 0, I can reprogram the firmware so that one of the knobs is the amount of portamento and the other knob is the amount of chorusing, because those are things that I can program into it using the little data file. And if I got unused knobs, all I have to do is rewrite the entire chord organ firmware and make another example of another hour-long video of how to use the thing. Or just do it anyway and be like, okay, new change. So yeah, there are many things to do. But this is getting me almost to the point of I've gone about 45 minutes now, and we've got about an hour left, so I'm wondering whether you'd like to see Nikola. This would be Nikola. I'm on the laptop where I do my work, and this is what it's like when I'm coding plugins. So I'm thinking maybe what we can do is fool around a little bit. I don't have to worry about this being on camera because it's its own video feed. And we'll take a minute to see what we've got here. You can look at these various code files. I have to scooch them all over so you can see them. And it looks like I'm in the process of coding this one because there are certain things about it that are, like, let's see if I updated this yet. No, apparently not. I got various stuff going on with these, and this is what I go through when coding something for the first time. What I think I'm going to do is try to open, I've got here a folder called library. I'm going to see whether I have an old version of it, and sure enough, look at that. See, this is also called Nikola, but it is a different thing. So I'm going to open up Nikola version. I can double click on it to open it up, or I can just click on the things and this little pane will also show what's there. So I can look this up and go specify the subtype of Nikola, Nico. What these things mean, this is the ID of the plugin. And you were seeing, but this is included in all of my code. This is Snow Leopard. This is 10.6.8. This is the old laptop. I code stuff to work on all manner of computers, and the way I do that is by coding it on these old laptop. And then the forward compatibility ends up being pretty good. So that's how we do that. It's 8 gigs of RAM. It's 2.35 Intel i5, and it's 10.6.8. So this is my antique laptop that I code all the plugins in. This is how I do it. So what we've done is I'm going to Nikola version. You can see all of this stuff that's included with it. If you generate a new thing, for instance, if I go new project, it's going to give me some opportunities to do things like generate an application, generate this or that, the other thing. And when it says system plugin, I can choose audio unit effect, and I've got templates worked out that already contain some of the stuff that I need. And also I've updated it so that instead of doing the Cocoa view, if I select this, it instead gives me a template where I'm doing a stereo plugin, which is a different way of configuring it. We'll skip that for now. I've updated this. I will hit a space just so that it lines up neatly. I think I have very little going on. See, I'm trying to keep these distinct because here's the thing, is these are going to look very similar. This is the one that I'm building, and this is the one that I'm essentially copying from that existed a long time ago. So we'll have a look at Nikola H. This is kind of how I started out, and this is what I had in the dawn of time back when I did this one, and it looks like it was made in 07. Whereas this one, I actually started this project January of this year. So these things kind of pile up. As you can see on the desktop, here I'll option click on the desktop and it'll hide the rest of this stuff. I have a pile of things in process, and I organize it kind of like this, where if I've successfully built a audio unit, even if it's one that's just been transferred from previously, I'll leave that on the desktop. This is a VST plugin in the process of being built. Probably hasn't had anything done with it yet. It's just sort of blank. It's a template. And I copy those, and then once I'm finished, I put them all in this plugins. And it's got Mac, AU, Mac VST, and Windows VST. And the Windows VST is also used for the Linux because I copy just the files. And interestingly, I get to just take Mac VST, for instance. I'll look at biquad double here. And I can just copy these files and drag them into the Windows environment and just sort of set it up and build, and then copy the stuff that is there. And then once I've got that, I can also drag the little folder into the Linux environment and go from there. So once I've built a working Mac VST, the other ones are just sort of walking through the process, as it were. And you can call this the base amp VST to some extent. Like it's got an IRR filter in it, clearly. Some of this stuff does not fit with how I do things now. So this is clearly an older one. It's got the anti-aliasing that I don't do any longer because it's not very good. This is why I'm trying to reinvent it. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff inherent in that, and it's a big, messy, ugly pile of junk. And what I had, apparently I was calling it high, dry, dub, and sub. I don't remember what this was. I don't know whether I actually have it on a... let's see, can we build it? See, it just did a thing, but that doesn't mean it won't work, but it probably does mean it won't work. What happens when we do this is the first time I build on this environment, it always throws this stuff at me, which means it needed to build stuff before building other stuff. If I do it again, it'll give me different errors, most likely. And it built it, and it's giving me warnings and not actually errors. So what's the deal? Do I have something that will actually work? We've got two different forms of input sample in here. So one thing I know I can do there is, let me get this so you can see it. I can just comment that out or indeed delete it because I won't be needing it. Why? Because it lives here. I'm defining the variable there rather than up here. This is something I actually picked up from my brother Dan, is that he likes defining variables where you're going to use them rather than putting them all up at the top and remembering what you were going to use. And it makes sense to me. I've learned to make sense of it. A couple of things are happening in here as far as, like, we're apparently not using the dry even though it claims to be using a dry. We've got the 32-bit floating point dither because that was part of the template that I used. And I'm going to try to tell you, this is the old form of doing a high-pass filter that isn't as good. This is all of these different IR filters cascaded together, which doesn't mean that I wouldn't also put this plugin out. We weren't going to look at this one, but I'm going to look at this one. And I see that I'm using ATA dry sample as my dry sample rather than the one that comes with the template. See, I'm defining one here and then I'm not actually using it because I am actually reassigning this several times. I have obviously not worked on this at all. This is an embarrassing pile of shit, but oh, I shouldn't say that. I'll get in trouble with YouTube. Oh knows. I think they've seen coders before, so this won't have broken anything. This won't have broken anything. This is not used. This is already defined, but it's doing the same thing. So having deleted that one, this should actually work. Oh, and here's an interesting detail. You should change this to an exclamation point. Flip equals exclamation point flip, because when you go over to the Windows environment, it doesn't understand the word not. It needs you to express it as an exclamation point. So that's a problem that will happen going to the VST version of it. And I seem to be doing it twice. I think that's a bug. I'm not positive, but I suspect it's something like that. You generally, if you're doing something which is interleaved, you don't want to be doing it like that. So, but let's leave it how it is for the time being and see what we get. After all, we can compile it and it seems to actually work, in the sense of maybe not doing what I wanted it to do, but it should compile into something that would run. And we'll make Nikola go away for a moment. All these different instances of Nikola. And here's how this works. I go to the build folder and release. And notice how I've got this stuff on the side says places, components, and VST. I can drag this into components. I apparently had one in there already, but we'll use the new one. And since this is not current macOS, I get to use that immediately. It's not going to make me reboot. Newer macOSs make you reboot. And I'll open up a thing called Dragon's Wave. That's an album that I did. I'm thinking of starting to use this for demoing things or building stuff because it's mine, so I can. And the neat thing about this is that people like this as a demo thing. I can send people CDs. This is literally off of a CD that I made, and I still have like 800 of them. So and what you're hearing is the laptop speakers, because I don't have it piped through into the audio. And this is not a plug. It's the laptop speakers, although technically I could hook up some other kind of speaker, I suppose. So what I do is, I'm in Twisted Wave, I go to Effects, and we'll go to Airwindows. And that is the plugin we were just working on. So if I turn that on, this was bass amp, such as it is. I think it's a bit of a pile of junk, but these are just distinct sounds. And this is a dry, clearly it goes up to 1. High is clearly a massive treble boost, and that's all it was. I think bass amp was based off of the Sans Amp Bass RBI. I owned that for a while. I think this must be what that was. It was voiced around that, which does not mean that it'll work in all contexts. Here, let's skip over to, or no, can I? Yes, I can. I can tell you right now whether it'll adapt to 96K. Does it have overall scale? Yes, it does. If it's doing this thing, it's defining a number and dividing it by the sample rate and multiplying it by get sample rate. So if we're at CD sample rate, it's doing exactly as expected. If we're at 96K, overall scale will become 2 rather than 1. And the IIR amount is controlled by overall scale. So this should adapt itself to different frequencies, to different sample rates. All of this stuff. And look, I've got head bump frequency and sub bump. This is kind of stuff out of 2-tape and also the bass generating stuff. You can't really hear bass off of this laptop, but one thing I can do, just like I can play it on the regular audio, I can crank it way up at least. This is what dub sounds like. So bass amp is kind of acting like this, where you're sort of hearing the laptop's pitiful attempt to make sound. You can also hear it distorts a little bit because you wouldn't be able to hear anything other than that. And then sub. Sub is not happy being given full mix audio. Sub is clearly the sub octave. So what we have in bass amp is not really a bass amp at all. What we have is dry signal. We have a parallel channel that is a wild treble boost. And this is the sort of thing I can continue to do, like if that works for people. And we have a separate channel that is super lows only. It's rolling off the mids hugely. And then we have an octave divider. And if I'm feeding it a full mix, the octave divider just goes crazy. But if you were playing a bass through it, it would kind of maybe do an octave below. So that's what bass amp has, is high, dry, dub, and sub. And you'd be enhancing the lows this way. I wonder whether I've compensated it for having everything up. No, clearly not. What I can see over on the side here is that I'm clipping massively because I have everything turned on. That's a lot of clipping. So basically that's what you will get is this. So let's quit out of here. And we are back in Xcode. I'll also use this to say about Xcode. This is Xcode version 3.26, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Copyright like 2010. This is a 10-year-old Xcode. And the reason I'm using that is it will still build for PowerPC, 386, and 64-bit. So this is designed, the way this configuration is made, and the way that I've got the template setting up for these, is that it will generate a triple binary. And it was some trouble setting this up. It was a pain in the butt. But having done it, this is how I use templates, is I set things up so that they will work the way I'll set things up that they work the way that I need them, and then just leave it and have the parts that I need hopefully contained in a way where they're not going to break on me. I don't want this stuff to change. This is why I don't have it attached to the internet. Nothing must update. Nothing must change. I can continue to making plugins in this way, and it will continue to work as long as nothing has updated itself behind my back or broken things. Because when Xcode updates, they delete stuff. They take out things like PPC support so that you can no longer build for G5s or G4s. There was a point where they had stopped supporting like G3 or something, and the G4s and G5s are still there. And then at some point they were like, okay, we're only doing Intel 32 and 64-bit, and they removed the PPC support, and you could no longer have it. And then they removed the 32-bit support, and you can only have the 64-bit. And this forces you into this backward compatibility hell where it just won't work, and your build environment has been sabotaged beneath you. So here we are in the old environment from 10 years ago, from version 10.6.8, Snow Leopard. And this is an Intel laptop, but I could probably, I don't know how well it would compile 64-bit Intel code on a PPC machine. Maybe it would. I think if it was running the same, the same version of Xcode, then it would build for the Intel stuff just fine. But I can run this and it'll run a little faster. In fact, it runs a lot faster than when it started, because I also got a SSD drive for the inside of it. I showed you what version of Snow Leopard I use. It's 10.6.8. If it was something else, I think it would tell me. And I'm not hitting the software update button because that's not what this is about. We stay. No. 10.6.8 means 10.6.8. We're not talking 10.11 anything. We're talking Snow Leopard. This is many, many, many versions. This is like around the time of Lion and so on. This is barely out of the PPC era. So let's fool with this quickly and see what we can get to happen in the next 40 minutes or so. Maybe we can get this done. I'm not sure if you necessarily want bass amp this quickly. I mean, you can want bass amp this quickly, but I also have let's see, daily noise. Some more background music. I've got things like this. That's a little peek of what could happen next week. If you don't ask for bass amp next week, you get this next week, because this one's ready. But that said, let's fool with bass amp. People seem to be interested in bass amp. And the thing about it, Bo, is I'm quite happy with Mojave. But I can't compile stuff for older versions of the OS on Mojave. So my compiling all lives on this machine. My compiling all lives on this older stuff so that I can furnish backward compatibility that I would otherwise be prohibited from doing. It would be stopping me from doing it. That's the thing, is you can include backward compatibility on these versions of Xcode with elaborate processes that involve downloading gigabytes upon gigabytes of old installers and running a fancy script. There is I don't remember the name of it, but there's some kind of project out where somebody is building an elaborate script that takes new versions of Xcode and puts all the backward compatibility back into it again. And you can do that, and then the next time you update Xcode to do what Apple wants you to do, or if you're building stuff for like phones, you're going to be compelled to do only the latest thing. They're going to be doing something where, like, okay, your stuff compiled on the old thing won't work. And this hasn't been my experience in plugins so much, but on phones, very definitely, and it's for some relatively good reasons, like security processing and stuff. But every time you download a new version of Xcode, that'll throw away all of your stuff that you put into it with the elaborate third-party scripts that put all the... Plus, I will point out, going back over to here, check this. This is kind of how this stuff works. Here is my Baseamp Xcode project, and you see you've got these groups and files, and you do stuff like open this, and you get sources and external frameworks. This comes with the template. It already has this stuff plugged in. If this was wrong, I would be confused to not know it and not know what to do about it. Products, that's going to be a build state in there somewhere. Resources, this is more stuff. Like if I go to this, info plist means property list, and it gives you stuff like this. These are files in the folder that I'm looking at. Like, I go here and dial it back, and you can see that this is kind of similar. We're seeing some of the same things. We're seeing English lproj, and you see there's a place that says info plist strings, and then there's this here which says info plist strings. That is going to be, and see, it's in English, but you can localize it if you want. And that's going to be the same as what's here. It's the English lproj, but you have to know that's where you find this part, or it's set up to do it by itself or something like that. And if in the next version of Xcode, they just change everything, then you're stuck, lost. I get lost easily with this kind of stuff. And so we've got build, we got Baseamp build that contains various stuff, starter AU, these things. And we go into here, let me go back to where the build comes out, namely release. If I tell it to do something else like debug and build it this way, first of all, it might not actually work because I might not have it set up properly. And secondly, it'll make another folder next to release and it'll say debug. But they could, says overview. They could change everything in next Xcode and have it all in a different place, and then I wouldn't know where to find it. So I rely upon having some of this stuff be stable. This is also why I don't update plugins by replacing the old ones. Instead, I put numbers on them and I leave the old ones where they are because stuff needs to be stable so that you can use it. Oh, Lorenzo has a quick question. I usually boost lows, mids, and highs with different plugins to get a flat result, like have tape-like lows with low. It makes if that works for you, like if you're trying to do something specifically, like say you're not necessarily talking about getting a flat result here, But supposing you wanted to flange stuff, but you only wanted to flange stuff in the mid-range and highs, what you would do is route stuff to different plugins, perhaps by using like a couple of instances of biquad in different channels. You'd split stuff to different channels, and one of them would roll off all the highs and one of them would roll off all the lows. And then you would flange the one that you intended, and then you'd merge them back together again, or simply mix them, throw them into the mix separately. And one thing, however, that I would point out specifically with what you cite, there is no use filtering stuff to run into 2-tape to get the lows a particular way, because 2-tape already generates lows on its own. You would not benefit from having that be pre-filtered to feed only the lows to it. That said, 2-tape does control highs, so you could be trying to do things like, I don't want to do anything to the highs, but I want to have the lows out of 2-tape. But in that case, what you'd be doing is looking for one of my bass plugins, like Fathom 5 or something. I still have some of that I need to do as well. And run the tape style head bump code and not the high frequency control code, which I can actually show you some of that, because that is actually part of Bassamp. We'll go back to source, AU source. I'm looking at this and going, this is how I know. Oh, no, wait. No, it was Nikola that I hadn't done anything with. Here's where my controls are specified in bassamp.h, is up at the top here. We got our default values, our beginning values. A quick answer to Bo, I have no idea what you would mean as far as doing LUTs on audio. Sounds like that would be a weird transfer function, and those I do algorithmically. So, and I don't know how a 3D LUT would even work for that. So here's my identifiers here. This enum generates the number of parameters. Like if I change this to 3, it would only show 3 of the sliders. If I change this to 12, it would show these 4, and then probably another 8. But then if you clicked on them, the program would crash, because they don't really exist. It's just claiming that they are there, but they're not. There are many lovely ways of making things crash. Here's our anti-aliasing stuff, which is bitchy and strange, and I don't like. But this is from back in the day, and this is consistent to what I had back in the day. It's going to affect the way that it overdrives. Like I could remove all of this, and then it would sound a little different. This will make porting it to VST a bear, because look at all this stuff that I now have to port. But we've got these anyhow. And this is how it... Another way of doing this would have been 64. And I think it's square brackets. I'm not absolutely... I think that's how that would be done. Let's see if I save it. So if I did that, what I would have is a set of numbers. And then if I was to do something with it, I would be assigning something to one of those, because doing this, I think I've got it right. I'm pretty sure that's the formulation. I work with this stuff all the time, but there's so much to keep track of. I'm making an array of 26 variables and then not assigning them at all. They're just there. There's a pointer, a way to access what sits at those locations, but I haven't blanked them at all. They're just kind of positions in memory that I can use. And they are float 64 in size, meaning I've specified 26, which I think is probably counting from 0 to 25. I often add a few extra in here just because I know that it's going to be doing that off by one stuff. And if I mistakenly go, oh, what's it, value number 26, like in C, I can do this, which is bad mojo. I've defined 26 numbers, meaning that I've defined an array and it offsets it this much. It offsets it 26 64-bit chunks, just one after another. And if I tell it to access the value 45, C is really stupid, so it just counts 45 64-bit chunks and lets me use whatever is there. That's not what I planned, and that's somewhere else in the program. This is a good way to crash the entire machine. This crazy stuff will happen and it'll fall over and go Poof. So we'll take these back out for now. This is one of the problems of programming in C, which is not so much the case with stuff like Java, which I believe checks its variables more carefully. And also note this, int demo timer. I don't use those anymore. In fact, I don't use these anymore. These are the previous way of dithering or noise shaping to the 32-bit bus in audio units. So demo timer was the mute that I used to use for when these were for-pay plugins around 2007 or so. And I had the demo plugins periodically go silent. So anytime it says int demo timer, it's because that's what it's doing. It's counting down from that, and periodically it'll make the output go quiet. And the way to fix that was not to unlock it, but to be sent a separate build of the plugin that didn't have that. So we'll just delete it now. In fact, we'll delete these things too, because FB flip, FBN shape A, and FPN shape B were the previous code for that. FPD, this uint32t, that means unsigned integer of 32 bits in length. And I don't remember exactly what the T is for, but it means something. Is how I generate the dither that I use now. And we can see that there. Actually, one thing we can do is delete these, because if I'm not mistaken, this is also going to, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get an error. I just deleted these things and did not delete them in another place. Let's go and see where that is. In this version of Xcode, I can click on this and it'll go here. And this part is a little above where the code was processing, and it is showing where I initialized all these things. It's the thing called baseamp kernel reset. It says void. What that means is when you go here, it runs this code and then doesn't return any value. If it said int, at some point it would say return something, and the thing that you returned would have to be an integer. Or if it said float 32, you'd have to return a 32-bit number, like one of these. These are probably 64-bit numbers, but they look about the same as 32-bit numbers. So what happened here? Well, I deleted where those variables were defined, and now we're trying to do them. We're trying to use something with them. So if I delete these too, now it will build. And we see that we're still claiming there are unused variables. For instance, and here, watch this. Some of this stuff is no longer being used. So I can delete this one. I can delete that one because I might as well just leave it the way I had it. This is my little line of code for if the value coming in is so small that you're going to go into slow floating point processing, it switches over to something else. EasyKB, I have no idea what phase shift by quad double will have. It will be in series. I don't know whether that means it will give a full phase space spin. I don't think there's any such thing as a full phase spin in the sense of it'll put it back again. No such thing. If you keep stacking more and more of them on top of each other, all that's going to happen is it'll phase shift even more and even more. So we can now delete this one, unused variable fp new, because I don't have it currently in there, and watch what happens. Unused variable fp old. Why was that not happening before? Because fp new said 1.0 minus fp old. That's why it wasn't complaining about this one, is it was using it. And if I delete this, then it's no longer using that one. And you might also notice I had a little clipping, which is exactly this, because FP old and FP new was a calculation that I did that was using golden ratio. So I just grabbed it because I'm like, oh, hey, golden ratio. I can throw this into a plugin anytime I want. I just save it as a bit of text. And there I am removing it as a bit of text. So now we have this big pile of stuff, and this is the audio unit that we would be using for things. Like, this is close enough because this is one of the old school ones. I'm not going to treat this like, oh, this is my great new amp simulator plugin, because it's really kind of not. But this did exist back in the day, and I'm okay with people being able to have stuff that maybe they enjoyed back in the day, or making it be VST plugins. So let's start looking at what it's going to entail for me to make this into a VST plugin. Firstly, I'll close this. And the way my process works is I'll option drag that to components and then put this up here, because this is where I put my stuff that is ready to put out. And I take my plugins and I put this over in Mac AU. I'll be referring to that soon enough. And what do we do next? We do VST master zip hiding underneath the chat over here. I'll drag that into, oh, I dragged the wrong thing. Can I undo that? Probably not. Doesn't matter, I'll put it back by hand. Now that says VST master. I have a cheat sheet for some of this. See. This is my instruction manual for how to start doing a VST plugin. And that's safe to have on camera because there's no passwords or anything fancy on that. Just instructions. That's all. So this is what I have to do. So we'll start doing that now. As you can see, it says VST master, not bass amp. So now that I've put away the AU version of it, it's time to start renaming it. Now this is the VST, but you can also see that it's called gain. That's because this is a template. So what we're going to do is, firstly, my friend Text Wrangler, multi-file search. As you can see, I was working on something earlier having to do with biquads. I was replacing it with biquad A. So instead we're going to go gain, and what I'm going to do is search through a bunch of files under Other. We're on the desktop. We're looking at this one that we're making into the VST build, and I'll choose that. And yeah, the whole problem of doing a phase shift is you can't get it back by shifting 360 degrees. Oh. You may indeed have that screen back. I forgot to put it back. So this is me in Text Wrangler doing a text file search, because under here we have Baseamp, the VST that I'm building, but it's just the template. It's got nothing but it says gain in it. And I'll be showing you more about that momentarily. But for now, let us do replace all. Replace all instances of gain with Baseamp for all of the files that live in here. That's info plist, that's gain, these files, everything. If it says gain, it's going to be changed to say Baseamp. Show results. Info plist said it twice. Gain has it in 26 places. CPP has it in 26 places, and there's 7 occurrences everywhere else. And we're about to see what that means. Let's get out of Text Wrangler and start working in Finder to rename all of these things by hand. Now, there are things like scripts and templates that are very clever and fill in the correct name for you, and I don't know how to make them. This is as far as I got with making templates do my bidding, is I can make stuff the way that I need it, but then trying to con the templates into, because this is all still in Xcode so far, conning the templates into filling in the right stuff was beyond my ability to make it make any sense. I wasn't able to figure that stuff out, so I don't use it. Instead, I just started making plugins anyway, rather than getting stuck on making it work the nice way. I'm more than willing to do stuff the grunt way than the nice way if it means I get stuff done. And here's another example. Renaming stuff by hand. And then I rename part of this by hand because I wanted to say amp proc. Now here's what happens when you open this file by double-clicking it. Since I didn't use a template, it is not updating stuff for me. So I have to start going through and going Command I, get info, and I have to do this every time I make a VST. And then I select build, and there's a place in here that I have to update to. You can see that it's updated some of it, but I keep scrolling down here, and oh look, what does it say here? Product name. But happy truth here. See how it's got gain tucked in everywhere? If I update it here, it automatically updates it in some of these other places. Some of this is where it's going to create folders and files and things, so you're telling it what name that's supposed to be. And as you can see, it's now using the correct name. I go back to general, and it also can't find the files because I've renamed them. So I do the same deal. Command I for get info. Select that. Command W closes this little window. And same deal for gain H. I think you mean Baseamp H, am I right? And gain proc. And once I finish doing this, you'll be able to see what the template for the VST looks like, which you could anyway. You could download these from my GitHub, but so what have we got? We've got some blank stuff. This is a default. This is 5 parameters that are all set up. Nothing else is here. And this is the code with nothing in it. Everything is zeros, everything is blank. This is a, oh, I'm gonna move over. This is a default. And some of this stuff, I've got like the last one saying dry and wet for no particular reason other than that's usually where I put it on a 5 parameter thing. I've got this other stuff in here where these are some possibilities for what you can do if you wanted it to be, say, indicated in DB or something, or a switch statement where you're having it say different things depending upon where the control is set. There are some VST hosts where you can do this and it'll run the get parameter to display, but then it will always just print the number. All of these are a 0 to 1 number, always. So you can make this code work. On some hosts it'll work, and some hosts it will not. And that's as big as this is. And then, yeah, save that, why not? This is where the code lives as far as the audio code. And this is the template. This is very little to it. I believe I have it set up so that you can literally run it and it will function. Although the only thing that does anything is dry wet. And since it doesn't change a thing, it will not actually matter. Also, I think I don't have a input gadget. I've just got these stuck in here because why not? I bet if I build this, it will not give me anything. Yep, didn't declare it. So one thing I could do is, just for the sake of, because we're not going to have time to walk through porting all of Baseamp to VST form, but I should be able to build a VST, open it, show you that it has 5 controls, and have each of them be a volume control, or have specific ones be a volume control. Like let's make double because I have a variable a sitting around that I habitually use. This is somewhat indirect, but whatever. I habitually use a as capital A as one of my parameters coming in, and I apply this to whatever I feel is relevant in here. So it's somewhat indirect. I could simply go, in fact, why not? Let's do that. We've got 4 controls, huh? So now I'll have 5 controls. One of them is dry wet at the very end. And wet is being assigned whatever is in the E variable. But now I'm actually just using whatever A, B, C, and D are directly in the code, which you can absolutely do. I just choose not to because I like having more descriptive things, but I like having the templates containing stuff that I'm used to seeing. Like in my template, A, B, C, D, E always means this is, and I'll tell you why too. Firstly, let's build this. This should build now. Nope, it's still hiding somewhere. Oh, because I'm checking to see that they exist. That's what. So interesting side effect here. Now this stuff will only work if the left channel is being manipulated either way. Although, let's make this good code. It's dumb code. It's quite ridiculous, but we'll make it supposedly good. What I'm doing here is and making little logic expressions. Firstly, I've just copied these. I just made a bug there, so we'll make it go away again. Put the parentheses in the wrong place. So here's how this is going to work. We've fixed a design problem in our last few minutes of this little exploration. And what this originally did was, if input gain is not equal to 1, input sample, both of the input samples get multiplied by input gain. So basically the way that works is, if input gain is full crank, meaning that it shouldn't change the volume at all, it doesn't even apply the multiply. And the reason I do that is because in floating point, if you're multiplying by one, that can change stuff. It might not be particularly audible stuff, but it can change stuff because you're compelling the multiply to be happening on the same scale as the number 1. So if your multiply is like a 32-bit value that is some incredibly tiny insignificant thing, and you do a multiply, well, the floating point format can handle a tiny insignificant number, but if you have to multiply it in 32-bit with the number 1, then it might be promoting that to an exponent level that it can handle, which means it becomes 0, and then you multiply it by 1 and end up with 0 again. So you can change stuff by multiplying it by 1 in floating point, and that's why I do this. What I changed was making it be A and B, and I noticed that I still had input value there. I'm going to copy this and paste it into the lower one. And that meant that only if the left channel gain in the first slider A was other than 1 would it do the effect on both of them. And I am not indeed omitting logical operators. I have not included it yet. So it's like, what do I choose? Do I choose to do if A is not 1 and B is not 1? Or do I choose to go if A is not 1 or B is not 1? And I'm pretty sure the latter is double bars. And we could demonstrate both, actually. And this will do two different things. It's a logical OR and a logical AND. So with the top one, if you move either of them, it'll start fading. It will multiply it by whatever the number is that's less than 1. The bottom one, both of them have to be moved off of 1 for anything to happen. And we will see that momentarily as a final little code moment, really. There is our bug. We don't have those as variables, but now we do. And if we build this, build succeeded. So now we have not really base amp, and I'm going to show you briefly. This is why I'm not changing from A to E. I could have this be input gain, right? And then I wouldn't have to assign that to something with a different name. But then all of this stuff that otherwise I can just make it bigger or smaller by deleting the numbers of things, I'd have to update it here. Let's see. Let's find out exactly where we have to update it. Well, no, actually we can't, can we? Because that's not a variable any longer. So here we have A. And can I do edit all in scope? Apparently not. See, that makes it even trickier. How about now? Nope, it's not letting me do it. I was going to show you something. Here, if I do this, Come on. There we go. That lets me edit all in scope. In this version of Xcode, other versions might work quite differently. This is the one I'm used to. So if I edit all in scope, all the variables that sit in here, or indeed I can do edit all in scope here, and you can see that I can change this to ERF, and it changed it here, and it changed it here, and it changed it in these two places. Let's put it back. And that can be actually kind of handy, because one of the things I like doing, I used to do this. I would be defining these ahead of time because I only had to do the subtract once in the defining part. This part in here runs many times, once for every sample in the buffer. This only runs once per buffer. So I was like, I can save this multiply, but in modern CPUs, that doesn't matter. You want to have fewer variables, but you can do math on them fairly easily. So what I took to doing was this. Oh, hang on, forgot my parenthesis. And now it changed down here, and it's now doing wet, and then the dry sample 1.0 minus wet. You can do this kind of math very frequently, and it's cheaper than saving extra memory. The CPU can do this all day long. So having only, again, edit all in scope, having only this one variable in memory and doing these various things to it is cheaper than having multiple variables doing the same stuff. And that is a cute little trick that I can also do up here, seeing as one of the things about VSTs is that I've got the 64 and 32-bit bus version here. So I got to remember to do both. Let's see if this works. Yes, it does. And if we build this, it should work. And we can close this. And now this is our VST build folder. We've built a VST of sorts, although it's not a correct one. And fire up a program and pick some random thing in here somewhere. Go to our VST effects, and now we claim to have basamp, but it is just, there's no actual code in here yet. I haven't ported all that stuff from the previous version, but we have separate things where we can now mute one side or the other, because that's what we just made these controls do. And this one only takes effect when both of them are off one, because of that math thing in there, that it's a logical operator. If C and D are not 0, it'll do something. But A or B, it's OR. And then, of course, dry wet is a functioning dry wet. So there you have it. And this is another piece of music that I have on the old Crush All Boxes website. It's the music that I did back in the day. I was doing a thing called daily noise. So I made tracks like this once a day. And there were different kinds of tracks. And I did it for a while and burnt out on it because it was exhausting. I was still making plugins at the time, but I wasn't on Patreon at the time. So there's your... I do not have a limiter on when I'm fiddling with new plugins because this is just a silly little laptop. If I'm doing it like this, it hardly is going to matter. Like, check this out. I can fire up like... let's see. Oh, here's a deadly one. Word length shift gain. I'll distort stuff 8 bits. It's 95 dB distortion, but this is, I fervently hope, no, it's not going through into the computer, so I'm not killing you all. So all that's happening is my laptop speakers are like, why are you doing this to me? And it's insanely distorted. So no, I'm not necessarily going to have a limiter on. I wouldn't want to do that anyhow because I'd want to hear what was being done. And this is all part of the daily music project that I did back in the day. Some of it was kind of neat. The mixing often left a lot to be desired. A bit of Iron Maiden-y stuff going on there. Might have been programmed drums though. A reggae apparently. A very chill track. Anyway, there you have it. So yeah, that is my programming process. If people would like me to do more of that, I can probably fit that in somewhere. I've spent some time coming up with like the cabling and interfacing and so on to set that stuff up. Like for instance, I can turn on that laptop and set to the other camera and sit in the comfortable chair that I usually use when coding this stuff with my laptop on my lap. I would just need to drag over the mic, and I've recently set it up so that I can drag over the mic to do that. So I could spend an afternoon with you folks doing that kind of stuff. It's just you'll be looking at the programming screen most likely. And that'd be less time-oriented than my Q&A thing. I do, however, feel that it does sort of eat into the Q&A time, so I have not had that many questions today, so I'll see whether I can't maybe have next week more dedicated to Q&A style stuff, but I should be able to jump on, not necessarily at the same time every time, but just randomly jump on, and if I'm randomly jumping on and just coding, then you're welcome to join me. I won't be able to see your comments as easily, though, because I'll be sitting over somewhere else. And yeah, that's my silly process, as it were. And now I'm wondering why it was that I couldn't replace in place the variables A to E, possibly because they're just one letter. And that's not big enough to call a variable in place. But anywho, I've been getting this stuff together thanks to the new cabling and such. Now I can... were you guys able to read the screen okay? Also, seeing as I'm talking about that now. Like, were you able to see the letters on the screen? Hopefully so. If it was a problem, I could always make it larger. My brother Dan would always be picking on me for how my screen was like in Fly Spec 7, tiny letters, because I like seeing more, which is in a way a disability, because my understanding, or at least the way Dan always acted, is like, well, if you're a real programmer, it's all in your head, and you can look at like 2 words and know where everything was. That ain't me, so I need to see more around what I'm coding on. So it was semi-readable, judging from Easel, Weasel, and Bo. I could probably make it a little bigger text. We'll see. Anywho, I've run later because I'm only committing to an hour and 45 minutes because part of the Patreon went away. But I've run well over that, and it's all good. So in that event, what I will say is goodbye to you folks, and you've now seen what's happening next week because I have given away that there's a plugin called Triple Spread coming out, and you didn't get to hear it very well because you only heard it on the laptop, but it is Glitch Shifter, but for that kind of harmonizer doubling where your center stuff is split into extreme left and right, and extreme left is a few cents sharp and extreme right is a few cents flat. But if I'm the dry wet control that gives you the center also removes the mid channel from the split, meaning that if you crank it all the way up, you get sharp and flat, but also the mid is removed. So basically, crazy stereo widener kind of thing based off of Glitch Shifter, doing stuff that you can't have with just Glitch Shifter alone. Or if you made a really complicated thing in like Blue Cat Patchwork or something, you probably could. Anyways, I will talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.